Good morning or good afternoon, Ms. Dice. I saw your hand wave. All right, so we're back on the record. It is May, try again. It is May 23rd, 2022, just after 1 p.m. This is a continuation of the Administrative Hearings Office hearing on the prosecution team's draft cease and desist order against Blue Triton Brands, Inc. I am Alan Lilly, presiding hearing officer of the State Water Resources Control Board. We left off this morning. The last thing that occurred was Mr. Nichols gave his summary of his rebuttal testimony to Mr. Allard's testimony. Mr. Nichols' testimony for this being Exhibit BTB 46. Several of you informed me that you had not been able to access Exhibit BTB 46, and I determined that we had not moved that over from the upload file where Blue Triton had uploaded it over to the download folder so all of the rest of you could download it. I did that, and you all had opportunities and confirmed that you were able to download it after I did that, and you've now had opportunities to review this exhibit. It's only 4 pages long. I apologize for the inconvenience, but I'm hoping that approximately hour and 45 minutes was sufficient for your review. So with that, does anybody have any cross-examination questions for Mr. Nichols related to Exhibit BTB 46? And I see Ms. Fry, Mr. Petrozelli, and that's all I see. So with that, it's 1:04 p.m. Mr. Petrozelli, you may proceed.
Thank you. So, Mr. Nichols, I wanted to ask you about paragraph 10 in your, I'll call it your response to Mr. Allard's testimony, because like Mr. Lilly, I'm not sure how many sirs to...
Mr. Petrozelli, it's easiest just refer to it as BTB 46. That way the record will be clear.
Okay. BTB 46.
So what paragraph do you want?
Paragraph 10, it's on page 4.
Okay, so Ms. Mullen, please display Exhibit BTB 46 and scroll to page 4 and then down to paragraph 10. Okay. All right, we now have that up on the screen. Go ahead, Mr. Petrozelli.
Okay. And Mr. Nichols, in this paragraph, is it correct that you're referring back to what you described as perhaps inaccuracies in the composite map prepared by the prosecution team in PT 314?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe you described those accuracies more specifically in your testimony in BTB 38. So
sorry, Mr. Petrozelli, I think it was inaccuracies, not accuracies. You misspoke.
Yes, yes, those inaccuracies. I believe you illustrated them in your prior testimony in BTB 38. So could we look at that, please?
All right, Ms. Mullen, please display Exhibit BTB 38.
Okay, so first, if we can go to, perhaps I'll wait for it to come on screen.
All right, and we'll move to the reference here is page 7, paragraph 18. So we will move to that.
Okay. Can we look at page 6, please?
Okay.
And paragraph 17.
All right, we'll make it a little bigger so that we can read it. There we go.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
So in paragraph 17, you talk about topographic details containing discrepancies, rendering the map unreliable. You specifically reference spring POD locations. So do you recall how the composite map determined the locations of those spring POD locations?
I would have to cite from, I think, prosecution team exhibit 313 to give you a specific answer, but I believe it was described in PT 313.
Okay, could we look? Actually, I think it was 312.
That might be correct. Yeah.
Okay. And I'll look at that in a moment. Could we go to the next page of Mr. Nichols' testimony?
All right, we'll scroll to, we have exhibit BTB 38, and we're now to page 7, paragraph 18.
Yes, thank you. And here in paragraph 18, you talk about the NHD stream features with the NHD data overlay. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does that overlay rely on georeferencing?
In particular, if you're asking about the overlay of NHD data on PT 314, I would assume that the stream was located based on georeferencing, the georeferencing process used to create that map.
Okay. So let's go to PT 312, which describes the preparation of the composite map.
All right, we'll display PT 312.
Okay. Okay, and if we can go down to page 2, paragraph 3.
All right.
And this continues on to the next page. So Mr. Nichols, if you can read that paragraph for yourself to refresh your memory, and you can just read it to yourself, that's fine.
Paragraph 3?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, we'll scroll to the next page.
I've read the full paragraph.
Okay. So do you understand, in your professional work and your experience, do you understand georeferencing?
I do.
Are you familiar with the ArcMap software program that's described in this testimony?
I'm not a user of it, but I'm familiar with it by name.
Okay. So are you familiar enough with this program to understand the approach that's described in Mr. Egger's testimony?
I understand the approach that's described.
Okay. So, I mean, would it be fair to say that he used the imported 1905 map and I'm using some non-technical jargon, use the software suite to align georeferenced points as closely as possible with current USGS publications?
that question was a little bit longer than I could grasp, but if I could answer what I think you're asking, I would state that it appears to me as though the prosecution team used an appropriate process to locate these features and bring them together onto one map. The challenge doesn't lie in the process as much as it does data sets that span from 1905 to the present, and the fact that there's just discrepancies. I don't attribute those discrepancies to the prosecution team, but rather the data sets themselves.
Okay, but would you say that so for purposes of aligning the maps, would you say that the topographic contours roughly lined up? And when I say roughly, is close to you could reasonably expect using this type of process.
The observation that I would make there is that when you compare the topography from the 1905 map, which we learned was carried from an earlier USGS map, to the topography used later, like in the 1953 and 1954 maps, the landforms themselves seem to change shape a little bit. And so there's a degree of inaccuracy is a loaded word, but they don't exactly match from 1905 and to later maps. And I agree that the prosecution team used diligence in aligning those features.
Can you read the sentence at the bottom of page 2, starting at line 27?
Okay, we'll have to scroll up
Continues
here.
on to the next page, and this is page 2 and 3 in PT exhibit 312.
Do you want to read it out loud?
Yeah, read it out loud, please. It's just one sentence. It's starting with ArcMap.
ArcMap's georeferencing tools translated and stretched the 1905 map to minimize the differences between known locations we identified on both the 1905 map and the ArcMap. And
you said differences. It actually says distances, but I'm sure that's what you meant. Yes. All right, we'll go to the next page. You can just finish the sentence.
Base map control points.
Okay, so what is your next question, Mr. Petrozelli?
So my question is, Mr. Nichols, using this, would this method align topographic features as close as possible?
Within the limits of the data sets themselves.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So
all right. So Mr. Petrozelli, yeah. I've given you a lot of leeway here, but you're getting way beyond Mr. Nichols' current testimony. Okay. All he said in paragraph 10 essentially is that if there was any errors that along the lines of what Mr. Allard discussed, they were in the georeferencing done by the prosecution team, not by him. So I think you're really going back over a lot of old ground here.
Well, I'm trying to clarify that the methods used by the prosecution team to overlay the maps would have aligned the topography even if the 1905 map was a little bit off.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to establish.
Wait. Okay. I think you've established that. Unless you have anything more, I think you need to move on.
Okay. And Mr. Nichols, you mentioned some other points potentially appearing in incorrect locations. I'd like to direct you to paragraph 4 in Mr. Egger's testimony. And you can read that for yourself.
Okay, I'm going to step in here, Mr. Petrozelli. We're going to go back to exhibit BTB 46, and you're going to have to tell me what you were asking him about. Because this is asking him about a prosecution team exhibit that was admitted at least the last round, if not the round before.
Okay.
You've already had an opportunity to cross-examine him on that.
I'm simply asking him about what he characterizes as errors in georeferencing. And there were different methods used to plot points on PT 312.
And PT 312 explains that.
Okay, then those are the questions I have.
All right, thank you. All right, so Ms. Fry, I think, Ms. Mullen, you may take down exhibit PT 312. Ms. Fry, I think did you have your hand up that you wanted to ask Mr. Nichols some questions?
Yes.
All right, please go ahead.
Okay. So in paragraph 8.
Wait, so let's get up exhibit BTB 46.
Okay.
And we'll go to page 3, paragraph 8.
Okay.
All right, go ahead with your
Ready?
question.
Okay. So you discuss BTB 38 comparison of subject maps. Is that correct?
Yes.
First, okay. Can we go to BTB 38, paragraph 6?
Okay, let's display that. All right, we have BTB 38, paragraph 6 up. It's on page 4, I think.
Okay. So you compared the 1905 map to a 1954 maps. Is that correct? Or 1950 series USGS maps. Is that correct?
Yes.
The 1950 USGS maps were based on aerial surveys. Is that correct?
I don't know that I would use the phrase aerial surveys, but they're using a photographic process to correct the topography.
It says aerial photographs on the base at the bottom of those maps. Would you agree with that?
Okay, I want to try to move this along. Ms. Fry, you can make that point in your briefing. The maps are in evidence, so you can refer to them, and we could pull them up and ask him, does it say aerial photography? But I don't think we really need to do that unless you think there's a need to do that.
Okay, I'll just move on. Do you know if that aerial photography was done with leaf on or leaf off photography methods?
I said I don't know. Can you hear me?
Oh, I didn't hear you. Okay, now I do. Okay, thank you. Could leaves have blocked streams from airplane view on a tree so you couldn't see the stream?
Potentially.
Could that explain why you couldn't count streams in a 1950?
Well, the number of streams that disappeared begs the question of whether or not they were visible. Certainly they were mapped to be present, and as we heard Mr. Allard testify, a certain field verification process would accompany that. The fact that they disappeared without any points of diversion in those canyons suggests that there was some difference in how they were mapped.
Was there physical verification in 1950 on the ground of the USGS maps?
I don't know. I just have the maps.
Okay, that's why. Okay, that's all. Thanks.
All right, does anybody else have any cross-examination? Thank you, Ms. Mullen, you have to take that exhibit down. Does anybody else have any cross-examination questions for Mr. Nichols?
Mr. Lilly, I have just one.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Doty, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Nichols. I just have one two-part question. Did you check the datum that was used for the maps in your BTB Exhibit 38?
I did not.
What about the projection?
No.
Thanks, that's all.
Okay. So I don't have any questions. Ms. Grady, do you have any redirect questions for Mr. Nichols?
Barring one of my colleagues stepping over me, I will say no.
All right, I'll give you one moment, or just a moment. I'm sure that you have ways to communicate with them.
No,
All
I
right.
think, but thank you.
All right, so would you like to offer Exhibit BTB 46 into evidence?
Yes, please.
All right, is there any objection to BTB 46 coming into evidence? Hearing none, it'll be received into evidence. All right, so we finished that round. So Ms. Grady, I'm trying to shoot, I've forgotten his name. Who is our witness we're getting this afternoon? Mr.
Grunwald?
Grunwald, have you been able to make contact?
Yes, and he is been able to go home or to the office and will be online at 2:30. And
All right.
hopefully, I'd asked him to try to do a test run on the Zoom system to maybe jump into this proceeding. So if he shows up in our waiting room, hopefully your staff will see that and we can confirm that he's successfully accessed, but I don't foresee any trouble.
Okay, good. Yeah, and we don't start a new session. And again, we'll just all turn our camera. I mean, and you don't have to, for that matter. You know, other people may be able to hear you, but if you want to just turn your microphone and camera on and ask him to do the same, I think you can see whether it works, even if the rest of us have turned our microphones and cameras off. So you may want to do that before 2:30 just to confirm that there are no technical glitches.
Thank you.
If I'm not, I'll just ask, Mr. Anderson, do you know if that in fact is how this works? Can they log on or turn on microphones and cameras, even if we're not turned on microphones and cameras?
I believe so.
All right, so go ahead and do that anytime you want. Just obviously be aware that other people may be listening to you. So with that, I'm going to turn off my camera and microphone until 2:30, and we will come back then. I just realized to do my other conference call, I may have to log off. If Mr. Anderson, if I log off and leave the meeting, will I be able to rejoin?
Yes, you will.
All right, just so you know, because I don't think I can do both through the same computer at the same time. But anyway, I will try as well. So we will plan to be back at 2:30. You have another question, Ms. Grady?
I did, yes. Just for planning purposes. So are we going to deal with the administrative discussing briefing schedule after that testimony, or did we want to?
Well, actually, that's a good question. We have a little free time now. So let's go ahead and at least get started on that. So I'll just tell everybody, my plan is I will send out a post-hearing order, which will specify the deadlines for closing briefs to be uploaded. And we will this time diligently make sure to move them over to the download folder right after the deadline for uploads, and for the follow-up objections to hearsay evidence cited in other parties' closing briefs. My plan is to give just over 30 days. So I was targeting July 1st for those briefs to be due, and then July 15th for the objections to be due. For some reason, I've lost my calendar here. So I mean, those are not, either one of those is a weekend day. Yeah, those are both Fridays. So that's my plan.
Can you please start over and just start with the list? Sorry, I got a little confused. First, we were about to all jump off, and now you're doing the full list on our briefing schedule. Thank you.
Right. So, yes, that's fine. So my plan is to have closing briefs be due on July 1st and written closing briefs, and objections to hearsay testimony cited in other parties' closing briefs to the extent people want to make those objections under Government Code 11513 subdivision D, be due on July 15. My plan is to have written briefs, closing briefs be a maximum of 20 pages. I'm going to send out a post-hearing order with the deadlines and specify the issues I would like briefed in the closing briefs, which will be the hearing issues and also some specific sub-issues within those that I have questions about and would like briefing on. So does anybody have any comments on that proposal? And I see Mr. Petrozelli's hand is up first, followed by Ms. Doty. So go ahead, Mr. Petrozelli.
So two things. I mean, there are a lot of facts in this proceeding. I haven't seen how if you'll be listing issues, additional issues from what was in the hearing notice. But I'm concerned that 20 pages may be a little short. I would probably suggest more in the range of 25 or 30. I would also ask that if there's briefing for raising hearsay objections, that there may also be an opportunity for responsive briefing to specify where there may be, where evidence that is objected to on the basis of hearsay may otherwise be admissible in a civil proceeding. Because otherwise somebody objects and they just say, this is hearsay, and maybe they say why, but then there's no opportunity to explain why that evidence that may or may not be hearsay or may be admissible under some kind of exception.
Okay. Ms. Doty, does that complete your comments?
Yes.
Ms. Doty,
I was going to say, with the briefing length, I'm also concerned that that timeline just over 30 days might be a little bit tight. I know there's a lot of people in my office who want to be able to read this and review it and have input, and with the drought, everybody's busy. So.
All right. So Ms. Doty, what are your comments?
So I'll echo the comment about concerns about brief length, just because of the number of facts and the number of exhibits that are in this case. That seems a bit short. I don't know if there's an alternative sort of statement of facts table that could be done or allowed to rectify some of that with a legal argument brief length, perhaps. But it does seem if we're to get all the facts and the legal argument into 20 pages, that will be really challenging. And then the only other comment I have, and I'm sorry, it's off topic, but Mr. Lowe just asked me to convey his apologies for not being here today. So I will do that. He had a family obligation.
All right. Well, thank you. And tell him we hope everything is okay with his family. But thank you for the update on that. All right. So Mr. Donlin, your hand is up. Do you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. We agree with Mr. Petrozelli and Ms. Doty that 20 pages is probably not sufficient. We also suggest or request that you think about dealing with the hearsay objections as a preliminary matter. There were a lot of exhibits that were objected to on that basis. I'm not sure that we all agree that there's a complete record on what exactly has been objected to thus far on that basis. And in terms of writing a brief, it would be good for the parties, I think, to know what evidence is in the record. And perhaps, Mr. Lilly, you could rule on the evidentiary issues before we put pen to paper on legal briefs. 30 days will be a stretch for us. We have a number of other proceedings, plus we're in the throes of summer and scheduling issues. Perhaps if you're willing to allow us some time, we might confer with the prosecution and other parties on some of these scheduling issues and make a proposal to you. Those are our initial thoughts.
All right. So first of all, let me explain my thoughts on the hearsay issue. I had thought, and I still think that by limiting it just to exhibits that are cited in other parties' briefs, it'll save all of you a lot of time, because I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of exhibits that have been received into evidence. And if you have to go through and object to all of them on hearsay grounds, it could be a lot. And if the party, or if no party cites those exhibits in their briefs, it's probably a fairly moot point as to whether or not they're hearsay, and if so, subject to an exception to the hearsay rule, and if so, how they're treated under Government Code 11513 subdivision D. So I did this to narrow your work, and frankly also to narrow what I have to review and rule on. So I hope you'll consider it. That was a thought out process on my part, and I think that still makes sense. So I do like your idea of all conferring, and you have an hour here. So why don't you go ahead, you know how to confer. Why don't you go ahead and do that? And we'll come back at 2:30 to hear Mr. Grunwald. And then after we're done with him, we'll follow up on these questions of basically its page length, schedule, and how we're handling the objections. And Mr. Petrozelli has raised what may be a legitimate point here, that if somebody objects to an exhibit on hearsays, the proponent of that exhibit may want to come back and say, okay, it's hearsay, but here's the exception to the hearsay rule in the evidence code that applies. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off here, and we'll all be back at 2:30 to consider those two things. Does anybody have anything else before we sign off, or go on mute, or whatever we're doing? All right, thank you. We'll be back at 2:30.